Okay. Hello, everybody, and I'd just like to start by expressing my thanks to Morris for giving me the opportunity to be a part of what I've found a very interesting and frankly challenging conference, and also to express my thanks to you for hanging on in here. We've had a lot of information, so I'm going to pile some more stuff on top of it, and I hope you'll at least take something from it. I was asked to speak on relationship in aftercare, and I've subtitled it myself, this turn or return to relationship in youth transitions from out-of-home care. And you'll see I put a question mark at the end of it. Because what I'm going to do really is, as I share where my thinking is in relation to that particular question. And I would openly acknowledge that I'm very much at the start of trying to think through the implications that lie behind that question for those of us who are working within the aftercare field, and particularly those of us who are coming at it from a social work perspective. And one of the challenges, the stimulating aspects of the last day has been the consciousness of just what a range of professions there are contributing to young people's experience of being helped or not being helped by adults. Now, specifically, what I want to do in trying to unpick that question of whether the return to relationship actually adds value to what we're trying to do in relation to children and young people. I want to sketch out where I think we are, certainly in terms of the UK, and also I would suggest probably internationally in regard to supporting young people leaving and aftercare. I want to show a short video clip on a mentoring scheme for care leavers in Cape Town that I have an association with. And I want to suggest that the notion of relationship, as it's been talked about here, albeit it's not a clear concept, I think that's been one of the useful things for me, is to recognize the range of possibilities there are when we're trying to use that term as a lens for looking at what we're doing. But still suggest that somehow the notion of relationship, however we determine it, has something, it resonates with where we are in the leaving and aftercare field, and it offers us something in terms of setting an agenda for the future. And this is a real question for me, of whether or not it actually does that. If anybody's had a chance to look at Gillian Ruch's book, and I would certainly recommend it, and just as an aside, I would also recommend Karen Winter, my colleague Karen Winter's book on building relationships and communication with young children. A slightly different focus to what I'm interested in myself, but both books, I think, very helpfully direct certainly people from with a social work perspective to this question of relationship. But in Gillian's book, she does talk about the history of relationship within social work, and rightly recognizes that there was a period in which many of us, and I certainly was one of those people in the 70s, who regarded relationship as frankly unhelpful, regarded a relationship and the way it was used as part of a hangover from a way of thinking about the work that pathologized service users, or clients as we would have called them, that individualized their situation and tended to elevate the professional. I was of a generation who felt uncomfortable even with that term, professional. So the question mark is real for me, and I know in order to address it, I need to stay to some extent within my comfort zone, and that's why you're going to hear about where I think we are in terms of aftercare, leaving care, which I feel comfortable with. But the clip then in terms of Cape Town takes me slightly outside that comfort zone because I had the opportunity to spend some time there and found it quite unsettling in terms of thinking about what I thought I knew about. And it's on the basis of that, feeling comfortable but being shifted a bit out of the comfort zone, that has led me to the position that I want to put to you, that in fact there is something in this relationship stuff. Now, where are we in relation to leaving and aftercare? Well, I think one of the starting point really is to say that now we are quite clear, which we wouldn't have been 5-10 years ago perhaps, that when we're talking about leaving care and aftercare, we're talking about one particular variation in a wide range of youth to adulthood transitions. We're not talking about a very particular siloed experience of a siloed group of children in the care system. We're talking about a variation on themes of transitions to adulthood. And it's a variation in terms of a kind of classic developmental pathway or journey from childhood through to youth, through to adulthood. A journey which most of us in this room have to a lesser or greater extent already made. A journey that takes us from a period of childhood where we have a given family position, a place by accident of birth, where we have school, friends, a home neighbourhood, which is more to do with our parents' choices than our own choices. And we have an ascribed identity. Most of us have had that experience, that experience of a dependent childhood will then have moved on to the period of youth, which is this exploratory independence, when we move from our family positions, create our own personal spaces, both within the families and without, and we move through the school into further education or employment or unemployment. We develop our own friends within our peer group, and the peer group, which is more than friends, becomes important to us. We start staking out our own territory in our own way, and we begin to develop an identity which will more or less take through into our adult lives. And adulthood, defined in this model, is one of chosen interdependence. And that word interdependence is important in terms of where thinking has gone. Although people will still talk about preparation for independence, I think it's now more or less accepted that actually what we're talking about is preparing, enabling young people to gain a form of interdependence which will allow them to cope with the particular life opportunities and experiences that they have. Within that, you'll see the series of dimensions that allow young people to make their adulthood their own through sets of relationships with the likes of the people in this room and beyond that. So we have this kind of general model of youth transitions, and that applies to care leaving. 20 years of leaving care research within the UK, I think, has given us a good basic grasp descriptively of what a pathway through care looks like. It certainly gives us a sense of this rather bleak experience at this end of young people returning to family for relatively short periods and then moving on. Housing insecurity, economic insecurity represented by unemployment, absence of training, education, early parenthood, and loneliness. Some of the things that we heard described so poignantly this morning. So there's the tendency towards that sort of aftercare, which is built on a process of leaving care, which has its own features, the particular importance that residential care still has in relation to that, the continued ineffectiveness of a lot of the preparation that we feel that we're providing for young people, and the low attention to getting good educational attainment. We know that leaving care experience reflects an in-care experience, which still there's a tendency for there to be low engagement by social workers and even residential care staff, bureaucratic decision-making, which we've heard a fair amount about, a lack of sufficient attention to education, placement instability, difficulties with identities and relationships, and roles of families and friends not being valued. These are features that we know have characterized the system and are still present. And we know that care experience hasn't come from nowhere. It's come from a pre-care experience of both children and adolescents experiencing a family and neighborhood contexts of multiple and complex challenges. And that to summarize what we know, is well represented in Mike Steen's most recent book on young people leaving care, supporting pathways to adulthood. So this we kind of know. We know that on the basis of UK research, and I would suggest that we also pretty well know it in terms of international research, or at least at the international research that we have available to us. There's a group called INTRACT, which is a cross-national group of researchers in this area. There was about 16 of us contributed to a book on the international experience of leaving care, but there's now 20-odd members of the group. It tends to be fairly Western European, North American, Australia orientated, it has to be said, and that's an important point to recognize. That our view of this issue tends to be distorted by the particular global context that we're in. But having said that, still glimpses we get of other countries in Africa, in the Far East, China, for example, a PhD student working in this area at Queen's at the moment. South America, we've had some contribution to the INTRACT. From the glimpses we get of that, it does seem to be the case that these kind of bleak outcomes hold up. So it does seem to be a global experience, these poor outcomes. But having said that, it's also very clear that there's no one single pathway. And it's really important that we acknowledge that. We certainly acknowledge that there are young people who pursue who are on a trajectory, which, to use a term that Mike Steen would use, there's a group of young people whose trajectories they're going under. There's a group of young people who are basically getting by, and there's a group who are moving on. Now, that's not a tattoo they have on themselves. It's where they are in their particular trajectory of leaving care. The trajectory doesn't always go up. It doesn't always go down. It's subject to swings. But it is helpful in working in this area to think about, well, that particular young person, what's their pathway look like at the moment? What does it need to be sustained in terms of an upward swing, or just held in a getting by swing, or prevented from going under further? So we have a fairly good picture of this area. And on the basis of that, we're in a pretty good position to put together responses to the needs of these young people that should work. And somebody talked about the factory yesterday. Well, if you like, we should be in a position to construct a factory that allows us to stick in our care leaves at this end, or children in care, and we get them out at this end, all kind of shiny and the way we want them. And we can do that because we do know stuff about assessment. We do stick with the United Nations Conventions on the Right of the Child, something we haven't really talked about here, but which is really important. We do attend to their best interests. There's all the policies and procedures insisting on it. We've good through care plans. And we're working with programs we know have been properly evaluated. They're part of the kind of whole evidence-informed practice movement. And in fact, we're evaluating our own programs. Quality control is good. So we have we should be in a position of moving in this direction. And indeed, Deirdre Coyle and myself, Deirdre, who's a very long-term experienced practitioner in this area, at present influential in policy and practice in North. She and I did an extended editorial for a journal, Childcare in Practice, which is just as a side plug. Somebody mentioned earlier about practitioners and others writing. Certainly Childcare in Practice, which is hosted in the Queen's, are very keen for practitioner contributions. But anyway, the special edition on leaving care, in the editorial, we said explicitly we think this situation has improved. We think that we're in a fair to strong compared to what was very patchy in the past. So there's a kind of good news story apparently there. So why the more? Tuned to you will have noticed the slightly cynical representation of the factory. Well, the problem is that whilst we may have a pretty reasonable view of interventions, a pretty good view of what's happening in care careers, and we have a pretty good view of the coping indicators at the other end, and you'll notice I've dropped outcomes for my prepared term of coping indicators. What we really don't know an awful lot about is this black box. What on earth is going on in there? We don't really know how we get from here across to here. We don't really have a satisfactory theoretical account of what's going on in there. Well, I don't. Some people in this room, I think, may well do, and that interests me. It also means I can't construct the kind of logic models which the evaluators are asking for. If you want to do a proper evaluation, you need to have a decent logic model, a model that tells you about how you think you're getting from here to there, so we can check it out along the way. So what have we got? Well, what we have got is practice. And because I'm slightly nervous about the video, I'm going to shift my planned presentation slightly and go straight to video. So we've got this problem of what goes in the black box, but we know there's stuff going on in the black box. So let's look at one particular experience of stuff that's going on in the black box. And this is a mentoring project that's being run in Cape Town, or not, as the case may be.
I opened up the window where it was, and it's no longer there.
Do you want to see if you can?
I'm happy to find it for you if you give me.
Yeah, that's great, because this my fiendish plan worked, or plan B. This gives me enough time to work through the next couple of slides before we get to that. So what I'm saying is we don't know what's going on in that. We can go to it.
I'm Sudhir, and I'm 23 years old. I'm staying in Philippi.
My name is Cecil. I grew up in Greenwood.
Masakani and his brothers moved to Cape Town from the Eastern Cape.
They used to stay together in town, and then they get divorced, and then my mom, she has to move to stay in the country.
Well, I can remember being a teenager like it was yesterday, and I remember it not being a very easy time. Young people are finding their boundaries and asking lots of questions and trying lots of things out for the first time, and it's a time when they could get into a lot of trouble.
First time I came, like, you don't hear stories about the school. There was a lot of fights, but there was like drama. Even some prefects used to like have help and stuff on them.
I experienced a lot of bad things during these years I was studying. I was like drinking, smoking.
I first met Nicole at Marsh Memorial. She was entering her matric year.
People are dealing with Muslim drugs and prostitution, especially for the young girls, because they live in poverty and then no one can make money, and that leads to drugs. And by using drugs, you get to know gangsters.
And they carry weapons.
Yeah, one of my mates' friends was stabbed actually.
But every young person needs a positive role model at that point in their lives.
I've been around a long time. I've raised a couple of daughters, and I see how much they actually need guidance continuously. And then there's a whole lot of people out there who don't have that opportunity. They don't have parents. They've just been brought up away from that family base.
The program is called Transition to Independent Living, called it the TIL program. Every young person in the TIL program is given a mentor, and the mentors work one-to-one with the mentees.
After a few discussions we went on a training course, and I've done some mentoring before in the work environment. She introduced me to Cecil, and that's how we began our relationship.
They commit to the program for 12 months, as do the young people. They sign an agreement to each other, and they meet once a week for at least an hour a week.
We took my criminal stuff and I would ask her about advice about personal problems and also academic stuff.
It's helpful for me because I never grow up sitting with someone and share how do I feel.
The first few weeks, we were just really getting to know each other, finding common ground, and it was interesting to understand where Cecil comes from, understand what his requirements are, what he's looking to do, how he's looking to better his life, and what his dreams and aspirations are. We found some common ground in rugby and football. I'm a crazy Liverpool supporter. Manchester United. So we'd have some interesting debates around who's doing what in the Premier League.
The mentor acts as a guide and an advisor and a friend, primarily a friend actually, and then a guide, to advise the young people on how they can go about finding further education, bursaries, employment, and just to live responsibly and independently.
And she told me that there is this law firm from Joburg, Warwick law firm, yeah.
Very kindly they offered to support him. They wanted to mentor him and guide him, and they actually paid his registration fee on the understanding that he will pay it back to them. He's getting great support from a lawyer at White & Case.
She's the one who's helping me to cope with the circumstances. It's my first time and there's a lot of work, so when I'm depressed and all that, she gives me the support, all the support I need.
Nicole is now studying at SIPA, which is a business university in Cape Town, and I actually saw her report last week and she's got some really good grades.
Nice, she's doing very well. Yeah, I worked with me in resource.
He has done very well in a part-time job that he started. He started working in a restaurant in town while he was still in school, and they've offered him a full-time job, and he's doing very well there now. He's also training. He's at college doing a chef's course.
I can say my average percentage is 70-something.
Zukile getting some great grades. He's struggling in one or two areas, but he's working really hard, and he wants this because he's had a few years since getting his matric of doing nothing. And now he's got some direction and a goal and some support. And so he's doing really well. Seth has just moved back to his community. He recently completed a football coaching course, and when I last spoke to him last week, he told me that he's now going to be coaching at the local primary school.
See, what I wanted to do is to bring soccer back in the community, because it takes some kids off the streets.
And Cecil's going to get paid for his work so he can sustain himself. So he's one of our success stories.
Most charities focus on young kids, whereas we've got these young adults who transition into independent living, into real life, if you like. There's very little focus there. And it's such an important area, specifically these young adults who are coming out of homes. And you can see the benefit already, the huge success that we've had with Say Yes.
Some children, they make the wrong decisions about how to live their life and stuff like that. And I think it's a good thing, and it keeps more people like what's on the streets and the drugs that will attack them, and like take them out of drug abuse and stuff like that.
The more I learn about it, the more I see that there's a massive need out there. And it's not just for people like Masakani who willingly realize that they need it. There's a whole bunch of people out there who don't realize they need it, and we see to a lot of people that sits on the fringe that we need to bring in.
I don't want to go back there now. So I think if I wasn't here at the university, I would be still busy doing those things.
Okay, so I was saying that there's this big question mark for me about what's going on in that black box, but what we do know is that there's something going on in it. Here's an illustration of it, and it seems to me from talking around the room that a lot of you are making stuff happen in this black box. So it is possible to start to try to hypothesize about what that might be. And for me, the starting point at the moment is that is summed up in this quote behind you. It's helpful to think about youth transitions in general and leaving care in particular as not the achievement of a set of completed outcomes for a phase of the life cycle, but as an ongoing developmental process of coping. And coping is an important word for me. That's as good as it gets for most of us, you know. So why shouldn't we be applying the same to the young people we're working with? Coping in acceptable and unacceptable ways, and that couplet makes it clear that this thing is up for debate. What I think might be coping, you may not think is coping. This is not... This is something open to debate, and we may well not disagree on it. You may reckon that the only way to extend inadequate low wages is to knock off the odd pair of running shoes. Well, that has implications that I would have some difficulty if I'm working alongside you. So coping in relation to physical, psychological and social circumstances, important to get the range in there, of what are for everybody now uneven and fragmented transitions. A paradox is that because the transitional from childhood to adulthood is more mixed for everybody, I think the experience of our young people is probably more normalized, if I could put it that way. And chronological age isn't really what matters. What matters is sorting out the levels of formal and informal support structures, the structures of opportunity, and the young people's personal agency. So the whole thing gets a bit more fluid, I suppose, is what I'm arguing. And on the basis of thinking in that way, it's possible to construct a logic model that says what we're dealing with here is some sort of a social ecology of formal and informal support, which enables young people to build a sufficient social capital, build sufficient resilience, to produce aftercare coping capacity, which allows them to at least get by, if not move on. And what we're in the business of doing is trying to make a contribution to that ecology through our interventions. And it's important that we recognize that that local social ecology is set within a national context, and that's set within a wider international context. So you can kind of set out a neat set of steps. And in fact, with Pat Dolan in Galway, we've even got certain tools, research, data collection tools to try to measure some of these things. But then you watch something like I'm around to say care people for a bit and find out what they're actually doing. And I'm thinking, well, does this logic model of mine hold up in the face of what they're actually doing? And I would say, well, certainly the social ecology stuff seems to be important. You can't really understand what they're doing if you don't understand Cape Town, if you don't understand their families, their neighbourhoods, if you don't understand the schooling system and how that sits within a global, a national context, a global context. Sure, you can see some social capital in there. Zakili's relationship with the law firm clearly seems to suggest there's something important there about accessing resources, finance, information, skills and esteem. Resilience, I mean, those young people are clearly, it seems to me, young people who are moving on. So the kind of components of the model seem to more or less hold up. But, and this is the kind of problem with this relationship stuff, what it's kind of doing to my head, is once you start using that frame, my kind of neat boxes that would get me from here to here to here to here to there, set within this context, gets kind of messy. All this blue is the relationships. And relationships, which increasingly, I think, is the motor of all this. What's powering this whole system, or set of systems, set of subsystems, this social ecology, are relationships. In which case, we actually need to understand relationships. We need to understand how internally to young people they're making sense of their own lives. They're relating to themselves in order to connect their social capital to their resilience. We need to understand how the internal dynamics about the specific local ecology that they're a part of. We need to understand what's going on inside our agencies before they even hits their social ecology. And that's before you get talking about the particulars of what's going on in the social, political, and economic context of the nation, or what's going on in the context of a global system that had that massive collapse in 2008. So the whole thing is getting considerably messier. Now, what do you do with that? Well, one thing is you just kind of pretend you don't see it. I suppose what Gillian was suggesting yesterday, you turn the blind eye to it. Or you say, well, actually, maybe we've just got to shift. Maybe we've got to make the head shift in order to focus on what the real agenda is here. Maybe we need to move away from thinking about the task being around matching needs to services, that technical task, and see it more as a relational task about how we provide resources that will enhance young people in their various forms of coping. And we accept that what we're talking about is developmental changes over time, which have a past, maybe deep in their psyche and subconscious in a kind of psychotherapeutic way that I think Gillian would tend towards, certainly in terms of their present, but also with a view to their future. And that means moving from a position which I think I would have held if this was about social systems, functionalist, deterministic, and which we could manage, and accepting that what we're dealing with is a more complex, but more more potential because of that complexity, social, political, and economic ecology, which also has a past, present, and future, in which consensus and conflict go together. That's why it feels as difficult as it does. It's full of power plays. Well, why shouldn't it be? Relationship and power, I think, is what's is the dynamic behind this whole thing. I mentioned a subconscious phenomena. There's also these unintended consequences spilling off. And the whole thing is really maybe about quality of relationships. That's what's kind of got into my head now because of all this. And to answer the two questions that Nigel Parton, who's probably the best known writer in the UK on childcare, particularly child protection issues, recently reviewed his own work over the last 15, 20 years. And he summarized the two main messages that we need to be grappling with is, what do we think's going on and whose side are we on? And I think to answer what's going on and whose side am I on, we actually need to be able to answer this question and understand a lot better what is the quality of relationship and how do we ensure it takes the form that we would want it to and which the young people we're working with would want it to. Thank you.